Hello everyone, it's Dana. Because the last video about why I left America did so well and people were so interested in the topic, I thought I would talk a little bit more about my personal reasons for leaving Boston. I want to also explain that this is my perspective as someone who didn't make a lot of money. So the perspective of someone who has a lot of money, of course, is going to be different. Living in Boston is probably nice if you can afford it. Number one, safety. So overall, Boston is a pretty safe city, but it has its problems. I had a lot of experiences that were a bit dangerous. One time I was chatting with a friend downtown Boston. She was sitting at a outside table. I saw her, so I said, "Hey, what's up?" And we were chatting, and as we were chatting, a guy with a knife was mad at me because I walked in front of him. I didn't realize that he was just like standing behind me and like walking back and forth, like angry, talking to himself, and he was holding a knife. Like, I didn't realize this stuff because it was behind me, but like the employees of the store that I was in front of were like freaking out. And they told me, thankfully, like I had just ignored the guy and he didn't do anything. But yeah, it could have been a bad situation, but thankfully, I don't know why, but the guy eventually just left, and he's clearly has some kind of problem and he needs help. And that's the unfortunate reality of most of these situations in Boston with, for example, homeless people or people who are high on drugs or whatever. They are people who need help and can't get help because of the way it is in America. So the other big thing was a problem that's very personal to me. This is a situation that of course is not going to happen to many people, but we lived in an apartment. We had a really good deal on the apartment. The rent was really cheap because our landlord was just a very weird man. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, he was very off-putting and he was very unpleasant to deal with. The rent was really cheap because if it wasn't, I don't think anyone would want to deal with him. And unfortunately, the upstairs neighbors that moved in after us were heroin dealers. So yeah, it became a very shitty situation. So originally, like, I had been getting irritated at the woman who lived above us because she was really loud. And I Googled her name that was on her mailbox, and I found a news article with her name about how she had been arrested for selling heroin and for having a bunch of illegal guns. So then I'm like, oh, fantastic. This is our upstairs neighbor. She knew that we knew that they were selling heroin, and it became very dangerous because, like, she had been arrested for having all these illegal guns. I mean, I don't know what she's gonna do to me, right? Like, if I'm watching her sell these drugs in front of our apartment and, you know, maybe she thinks that I'm calling the cops or whatever, maybe she's mad at me, like, what is she gonna do? So that was a scary situation. And eventually those neighbors moved because she literally emailed the landlord and she said she was scared of me. Which, in other words, she was scared of me telling the cops that she was selling heroin. So anyways, so then we were very happy that they left. And then the new neighbors that moved in were not any better. It was an abusive man and his girlfriend or wife. It was really bad. I mean, we could hear him beating her up and we had to call the cops a lot. And she was mad at us because she was in denial about the whole situation. And then he was mad at us, obviously. And he, one time, like, my boyfriend at the time could hear him beating her up, and he called the cops, but he also went upstairs and knocked on the door and was like, "You need to stop. Like, what are you doing? You need to stop." And then a guy came out and attacked my ex-boyfriend, and I was on the phone with him at the time and I could just hear everything happening and I'm freaking out. Finally, the downstairs neighbor, who was my friend, came outside and pulled the two guys apart, and the police came and all this. But yeah, so of course I'm scared all the time that this guy is gonna do something to me. It was just not a fun time in my life and I was always stressed. I mean, I was in university at the time getting my master's. I was always busy working on things and I had like 3 jobs. And then in addition to everything, there's this crazy guy who might attack me at any moment. So yeah, it was not a good situation. But then, like I said, we couldn't move out because we couldn't afford any other apartment. So that's how we got stuck in that stressful situation. Number 2, Boston is expensive. If you can't find a good job, it's almost impossible to live comfortably in Boston. This is a very simplified explanation, but basically most people go to college and they get a lot of student loan debt. When I graduated, I think I had about $40,000 of debt. So every month we have to pay our student loans. In my case, it ends up being about $600 a month, which is a huge amount. So basically, I have to pay my rent and my student loans every month, plus my health insurance. After you turn 26, you have to pay for your own health insurance. And that's also like, I don't know, I think it was like $200 a month. So plus, you know, my heating bill, electricity bill, water bill, like everything together meant that I had no extra money at all. Like, so I couldn't go out to eat, I couldn't buy new clothes, I couldn't buy games, I couldn't do anything. I basically just existed to work and pay my bills. Number 3, bad public transportation. The last point that I want to talk about is the public transportation in Boston. So like I said, I didn't have a lot of money. There's no way that I could afford to have a car. So I have to rely on the public transportation, but it's not very good. So I had to take the red line every day to go to work, and a lot of the times it was delayed. Like they won't even update you either. It just says like, oh, the train is delayed, and you're like, okay, well, like when is it coming? Who knows? And I was late a lot. I had to take Ubers to work a lot because the train would just not show up, or the train would stop randomly at a station and I'd have to just walk the rest of the way or take an Uber. By far the biggest problem is that the infrastructure is so old. Like they don't spend any money upkeeping the stations, upkeeping the tracks, the trains. It actually is a bit dangerous. Like I think every year that at least one train derails in the Boston subway system. And usually it's only like minor injuries, so it's not terrible, but it's still like, why does that happen? For example, a train derailed at JFK station and caused a ton of damage because it hit the station platform. People were mostly okay, but it caused a lot of damage, and so they had to shut it down for a while to fix the damage, and a nightmare. Another thing is that the stations themselves are falling apart. So like recently there's been a case where parts of the stairs fell and almost hit a guy. In another case, a guy was going up some stairs at JFK station. He wasn't supposed to. They were marked as like don't enter, but like it was dark and he couldn't really see, I think. And there was just a giant hole in the stairs and he fell through and died. So the situation with infrastructure in Boston is just awful. It's like so different from the clean, modern train stations of Tokyo or Nagoya. They're generally beautiful. So that was 3 things that I wanted to give some more details about why I left Boston. So like I said, this is just my own personal experience, and I'm sure if I had more money, I would have had a totally different experience living in Boston. So now I'm much happier in Tokyo. Anyways, thank you all for watching and see you in the next video. Bye!